Well, it's Soul Week here in Search of a Way, and just clear my throat here. I should have cleared my throat before I started recording, shouldn't I have? It's Soul Week here in Search of a Way. We're going to talk about two theories of the soul. Why are we talking about the soul at all? Hasn't science dispelled any need to talk about the soul? Well, science studies physical stuff. It studies material things. And material things are constantly changing. They come into existence and go out of existence. And if you're just a material thing, well, you haven't been around very long then, have you? Depending on which kind of materialism you subscribe to, you are at most 7 years old, if you want to take a hard materialist line of any kind. And yet it seems like there's something about our life, my life, that's more than 7 years old. So, what is it about me that isn't captured by a physical description of myself? By a physical description of myself, I mean an account of all my material parts, all the cells and atoms in my body. It seems there's something about me not captured by a materialist analysis. And we call that the soul. Perhaps the more common way of talking about the soul now, the way you're more familiar with soul talk, would be the dualist theory of the soul. Now, dualism comes from the word dual. It means two. Two. Well, what are the two things in dualism? Dualists believe there's two kinds of substance. So here I have to introduce a technical word, okay? Substance has a technical meaning in theology. You might think you get home and you see a puddle of something like syrup on the floor and you say, there's some sort of substance on the floor. That doesn't quite capture the technical meaning of substance. The technical meaning of substance is a substance is something that exists on its own. I'll say that one more time. A substance is something that exists on its own. So you're a substance, and so is my cat, Mr. Whiskers. Now consider red. Just consider that color, red. Does red exist on its own? Can you bring me a bucket of red? How much does red weigh? You see, red is not a substance. You can have a red shirt. A shirt's a substance. You can have a red fire hydrant. A fire hydrant's a substance. My shirt is red. My shirt's a substance. But red is not a substance. Red is just a feature that some substances have. So, the universe is populated by substances and their features, and according to the dualist, there are two kinds of substances in our universe. Now, before I go too much further, let me say that there are many varieties of dualism, and many varieties of dualist theories of the soul. Two of the most famous ones in the history of philosophy that you may have studied in other classes are Plato's and the one associated with René Descartes. In theology class we don't need to get into all the different versions of dualism. For now, I'm just going to tell you what dualism is in general. Dualism in general is the theory that some substances are physical, material substances, and other substances are spiritual, non-material, physical. Non-physical, I mean. Not material, not physical. They're spiritual. So the mark of a material substance, according to some dualists, is a physical substance is something extended into space in 3 dimensions. It's got width, height, and depth. Spiritual substances, on the other hand, have no parts. They're not made of material, they're not made of matter, so they can't have physical parts. They're not extended in space. So on a dualist theory of the soul, it's very simple, really. The soul is simply an immaterial substance that somehow interacts with the physical substance known as your body. I'll say that again. The dualist claims that the soul, that is, whatever it is about you that isn't captured by physical measurements, the soul is simply an immaterial substance that interacts with your body, your bodily substance somehow. Most dualists will say that you are your soul. And soul here is usually associated with mind. Soul is associated with mind. Why? Why is soul associated with mind? Well, again, keep in mind, we're trying to figure out a way of talking about that of ourselves which isn't captured by matter. And the reason we have for thinking there is anything like a soul, like anything beyond our physical self, is that we have all these memories and experiences. We have an inner life. We have an inner life, a mental life that isn't captured by anything physical, that can't be captured by anything physical. Sometimes I meet people, especially freshmen, who are under the impression that the word mind is synonymous with the word brain. And in English, we sometimes colloquially speak that way, right? But really, that's a very bad way of speaking. There is zero reason to think that the mind and the brain are identical. You might think that, but I'd have to see an argument for it. There is no hard... look, if you don't believe me, just go into any neuroscience department in this country at any university and ask the chair of the department what his position is on the hard problem of consciousness. Right? Trying to explain how anything physical can be responsible for consciousness, for your awareness of the world around you, for your inner life, for all the inner dialogues and inner monologues you have with yourself, all the thoughts that you have, your memories, your personality, your engagement with the world, all that stuff that gets bound up in what we call your consciousness, your whole mental life. There is, to this day, zero explanation for how that can be explained in terms of anything physical. Okay, we have the periodic table. Not one item on the periodic table is capable of producing consciousness, nor, as far as we've been able to tell in our laboratories, is any mixture of the elements capable of producing a conscious substance. You're a conscious substance. The origin of your consciousness is utterly mysterious to science to this very day. So, given that we have reason to think there's something about ourselves which goes beyond our body, which we call soul, and given that it seems our conscious life cannot be explained in terms of our physical self, it seems we would expect a connection between mind and the soul. So the dualist will usually say that you are, for all intents and purposes, your mind. And most dualists will say that your body is fairly accidental or incidental to who you are. Your mind is sort of trapped in your body, and dualists say, there's no reason to think that your mind won't continue to exist after your body, which is why dualists will usually subscribe to some theory of personal immortality. I'll say that phrase again, personal immortality. In theology and philosophy, you'll hear people talk about personal immortality. What does personal immortality mean? Personal immortality means that whatever the location of your consciousness is, your center of consciousness will continue to exist even after your body rots and decays into the ground. So the dualist will usually associate, the dualist will call the soul The soul is a center of consciousness. And although your consciousness for the moment may be somehow wrapped up with your body, your center of consciousness is not a body, according to the dualist. Your soul is an immaterial substance, a non-physical substance. Your mind, according to the dualist, is it's often compared to like a ghost in a machine. So your physical body, which is governed by the laws of physics, right? If I push it down the stairs, it'll fall in accordance with the laws of gravity. But your body sometimes does things unaccountable for the laws of physics. As when you make a decision to do some jumping jacks. Right? When you jump up out of a seat, you've defied the laws of gravity, in a sense. And you've started doing jumping jacks. Well, whatever made that decision, that mind, that's the real you, according to the dualist. So this is a very simplified version of dualism that I've given you. Very, very simplified. If you want to talk more about the intricacies of dualism, I teach next year Intro to Philosophy, Philosophical Inquiry. We can do that there. What I'd like to talk about today are the benefits and weaknesses of the dualist theory of the soul. Let's start with the strengths. Well, one strength is it seems to correspond pretty well with how we usually talk about the soul. In religious circles especially. People say that when I die, I'll see God. I mean, what a strange thing to say. When I die, I'll see God. When I die, I will... Any statement of the form, when I die, I will, ... is a very strange one, because death, of course, means the end of you. Imagine if you asked somebody, what happens in the movie after the end? What do you mean? I mean, after the end of the movie, then what happens in the movie? It seems like, I mean, no, I'm not talking, yeah, I hear you. No, I'm not talking about one of those fun little gotcha scenes that they put after the end credits. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, the end of the film reel. What'd you say? Oh, I said film reel. You see, a very long time ago, movies were on these long little strips of thin plastic called film. What happens after the end of the movie? It makes no sense. What happens after I die? Well, the dualist thinks that they can answer this, because they say death doesn't mean the end of you. Death, they say, means the corruption of your body, the end of your body. But you, according to the dualist, your mind, the real you, the spiritual soul you, there's no reason it should cease existing just because your body stops working. So the dualist can accommodate the dualist can quite easily accommodate a lot of religious language. They're just talking about a separate substance. What are some other benefits of dualism? Well, it's straightforward. It's very easy to understand, and a lot of people consider that a benefit of a theory. Right? As long as we can understand the idea of two kinds of substance. Well, we understand, ever since you were a little kid, you understand some substances, cats and squirrels and trees, coffee mugs. You understand that those are substances, as to where green is not, or to the left of is not, or 7 inches long. 7 inches long is not a substance, although some substances are 7 inches long. So it's a very straightforward theory, and it's easy to understand. So what's the problem? Are there other advantages to dualism? Probably. Why don't you think of some? See if you can think of other advantages to dualism, the dualist account of the soul, and give me some thoughts down in the com box. Problems with dualism. How's it work? That's the big question. I mean, You tell me that the soul, the non-material substance, acts on the physical substance. How? I mean, I can understand how a physical substance acts on another physical substance. I pick it up, right? I mean, we've got an entire science, the science of physics. If you want to know how a physical thing affects another physical thing, I mean, unless you're talking about very, very, very small things or very, very, very large things, really, you can take an introductory college mechanical engineering, basic mechanics, Newtonian mechanics, will tell you how physical things affect other physical things. It's very straightforward, and you only need to start making exceptions when you're at the very, very tiny and very, very big levels. But how does something without physical parts affect my body, as the dualist claims? The dualist claims that my soul makes my arm do this, right? The laws of physics don't make my arm do this. The laws of physics make my arm go. Someday, after I'm dead and my soul's no longer acting on my body, as the dualist would have you think, when I'm dead, you know, my arm will just obey laws of physics, just like this. Well, how? How on earth is a soul making my arm do this? That's a big question the dualist can't answer. A second problem for dualism, I think, everybody will tell you that first problem's a problem. And I mean, now let me say this, when I talk about both of these theories, when I talk about strengths and weaknesses, I'm not giving a verdict here. The literature on this is huge, and the objections I'm giving you are I mean, we could take a whole semester on dualism, take a upper level course or even a graduate seminar, a whole semester on dualism, and we could talk about these objections for the whole semester. But every dualist will tell you, any dualist in the country, and I know a few, will tell you that as soon as they committed to dualism, the next thing they did, I mean, they woke up the next morning and they got out their notepads and their books and whatever they do to work, and they had to write out a theory of how their theory of dualism was going to overcome what's called the mind-body problem, how the mind affects the body. But a second problem for dualism, really only comes up for Christians who subscribe to dualism, is trying to account for things like the resurrection, right? The resurrection. A lot of people think Christianity lends itself very easily to dualism. All the talk of the soul in Christianity and where souls go after they die. And people talk about, you know, the Eucharist healing the soul and things like that in Christianity. And it seems like they have a very dualist conception of the soul. Well, Christians believe that at the end of time, they'll be resurrected in the body, and that they'll live bodily forever with God, in their bodies, in their animal, fleshy bodies. Well, if dualism is right, and I'm really a mind, and my body's just kind of a trap for my mind, well, then that seems pretty fucked up that I'd have to spend eternity stuck in a body. It seems like a bad thing. Why not let my mind run free like it's supposed to, the real me? Now again, Christian dualists have ways of trying to accommodate this objection. We don't have to go into them now. For now, I just want you to understand the dualist theory, which is that there's two kinds of substances, two kinds of things with independent existence: physical substances and spiritual substances. In general, the dualist says you are your soul or your mind, which is an immaterial substance, a spiritual substance. There's advantages to the theory and disadvantages. Think about them. What do you think? Do you think that the advantages should win the day? Are there ways of responding to the disadvantages? Well, think about it and then stay tuned for another lecture about the soul coming up next.